Hello, Matt Oswalt here. I have another Keeping It Classless Labs for you all today, and today's a special one. Cisco ACI. So this product has really only been really announced for a few short months. I think it was December, or rather late November, when it was announced. Cisco is rolling this out as part of their response to sort of the SDN movement, though they would probably classify it in a different way. Long story short, the product line is supposedly their strategy at dealing with this question of network policy and changing the paradigm of how networks are configured. So this obviously sits among other vendor products. The biggest competitor, I think, is generally accepted to be VMware NSX. There are others in the industry. One that's of particular interest to me is Plexi's entire family of products. Frankly, their entire, since they're a startup, they have a lot of focus on the policy model in general. So there's just a lot of interest in this part of the industry, and I figured what I would do is since I was fortunate enough to have been given access to a pair of Nexus 9Ks that was recently put under the care of one of my the coworkers that I work with. They were kind enough to give me some access, so I figured I'd pass on the information to you guys. And this video specifically will go through some just initial configuration. Nothing too revolutionary. I mean, it's kind of very similar to how you would set up like a Nexus 7K, for instance. But I figured it's still useful to since this is just not made, it's just not been in the market for so long. So there's probably not a lot of knowledge on this particular switch. Before we get started, I want to mention that I have a pair of 9508 switches. I don't have any of the top of rack, or rather middle of row, or whatever you want to call them, form factor switches. This is just the modular chassis that I have access to, but there's two of them, and I'm hoping to crank out a few videos actually on some more advanced configurations once we get past this initial config. So this switch has already been configured, so the first thing I want to do is do a write erase and reload. And this will just wipe the configuration out in that way. From the console, you'll be able to see the reboot process, and then we'll go through the startup script. Okay, so when you get to this part of the process, auto provisioning is enabled by default. So just go ahead and say abort, and you should be able to get to the initial configuration script. So pretty standard startup time from like a 7K perspective, roughly, depending, of course, on the modules you have installed. That might change the boot up time by a little bit. Generally speaking, this startup script is the same as what you would expect. So we'll enter the password for admin. I accidentally hit enter too many times, so I enforced secure password standard. No worries. And why not? Let's enter the configuration dialog, even though usually most people don't. Create another login account. No, let's not do that. Let's not do any SNMP. Yeah, like I said, this is pretty standard stuff. We'll just name it 9KA for the time being. Yes, let's configure out-of-band management. And that is, we'll use 10.2.1.8. Force a habit. This is why we don't use these scripts. I'm too used to doing it the regular way. And then just /24 is fine. And we will configure the gateway. As you can imagine, it is 10.2.1.1. Advanced IP options, let's go through that as well, just for the sake of being exhaustive. No extra static routes other than the default route. No, we'll leave DNS as it is, as well as the domain name. If you're answering this question as yes in today's day and age, shame on you. Yes to that question, and we will want to use RSA, and we'll do 2048. No NTP. We'll leave control plane policing at the default. And here's what we're looking at from an initial configuration perspective. Again, nothing groundbreaking here. This is very familiar to really anybody that's done any Cisco, and even a lot of other vendors do this initial configuration script of sorts. Would you like to edit the configuration? No. And yes, I would like to use it. So that configuration is now applying. I do have two other tabs open representing the actual management addresses of the two 9Ks, but we'll just work from this console. It works just the same. Okay, so let's log in. Pretty standard Linux-y login screen. As we can see, this is kind of very familiar to any other NXOS installation. We're used to seeing the GPL notices here, things like that. Now, this is by far not going to be an exhaustive walkthrough on how to configure the 9K. This is really focused on I just want to focus on mostly some of the capabilities that we see, sort of what you're presented with from an initial configuration perspective, things like that. So the first thing we want to do is show run, just to see what's configured by default, or rather by default plus the script that we just ran. So let me scroll back up to the top here. It looks like it allocates us a VDC. This works a little differently from the 7Ks. This doesn't force us into any sort of management VDC. It just allocates the interfaces that are presented, which we'll see in a second. So that's all done for us, which is fine. Username, SSH, all these things are pretty standard. Management VRF, as regular data plane traffic will occur over the default VRF. And everything else is pretty straightforward. So nothing that we see from an initial configuration is really that much different from what you would expect to see in a, let's just call it a traditional NXOS switch, like a 7K or a 5K, which is good because from an initial perspective, there's no learning curve really to install the switch, configure it, get it up on the network and accessible to somebody that might configure it further. So the first thing I want to do is show version information. and I'm going to do a little exclude here. I'm trying not to show serial numbers if at all possible. Okay, so that should be good. So it looks like we have some version information here. This is the new license as we saw before. From a software perspective, NXOS looks like it has a special 612 I11 version. The compile time is 1107, which is, darn it if that wasn't very, very, very close to the announcement. I believe the announcement was either the 6th or the 16th. And either way, that is incredibly close. So these guys were working on this for pretty much right up to that last minute. Not that they were shipping the 9Ks that night, but still, the proximity to the release date is kind of funny. As I said earlier, the hardware that I'm working with is a 9508 8-slot chassis. It's the only modular slot, or rather the only modular switch that Cisco's making currently on the 9K line. I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, they said that there would be some additional form factors for a modular chassis. I think one bigger than 8 slots and then one smaller than 8 slots. But the 8-slot chassis is the only option there. I think they have about 3 choices to choose from when it comes to a fixed configuration switch. Middle of row, end of row, top of rack, whatever you want to call them. I believe there are 3 modules, but I'll have to check. Intel Xeon CPU for the Supervisor. Nothing really that dramatic there. And the next command I'd like to show you, and again I'm going to exclude some serial numbers. Not that you're interested in those anyway. Show module. So we have visibility into, of course, the Supervisor Modules here. The system controllers, which I believe are those very narrow blades on the side of the switch. I don't have the diagram in front of me, but that will certainly make its way into the blog post that I am going to embed this video in. The Supervisor Modules, of course, can't have a modular switch without those. Fabric modules, those you know what? I'm going to also embed a video by Lillian Kwan, a TME for Insieme, now Cisco. She does a fantastic job of explaining the traffic flow for both unicast and multicast through the entire switch. And it was just very interesting to hear her talk about the fabric modules and the role that they play in this switch. It's really not the same as any other switch that Cisco makes, and it's a good video to watch. So I'll embed that if I remember. And then finally, just frankly, because we didn't have, this is really just demo gear, there's not a need for a large amount of port capacity, at least not right away. Just a simple 36 port 40 gig Ethernet module. Now this is of course not the ACI ready line card. This is the traditional Broadcom Trident 2 line card for VXLAN bridging. Pretty standard stuff. It is. It doesn't have a. I don't really know. I can't remember what the specifics were regarding the ACI compatibility. I believe there is some hardware component that's missing. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that's the reason that this is considered a non-ACI compliant line card. Otherwise, they would probably come out with some kind of software upgrade to do that in the field. So that is the hardware that we're looking at, and I think that's enough of that. I think it's time to move on to the software, or at least the firmware, whatever you want to call it. Let's just keep it real simple. Let's do a show. Question mark. Let's see what we got to work with here. A lot of this will be familiar. A lot of this I'm not familiar with, and I think that there are some things that we can pick out that are interesting. The very first thing that grabs my eye here that should interest just about all of you is this option here. I'm not going to enable it or even really configure anything regarding this in this video. I'm going to save that for a new one. But just suffice it to say, this is an incredibly useful area of the 9K configuration, and this is one of the things that we were promised in the on the official announcement, was that this is one of those one of the first Cisco switch to allow direct access to the underlying Linux operating bash shell. which is really cool. So if you wanted to, install your own sort of container application to do some custom monitoring or configuration of the switch, you should be able to do that. Now, my guess is, I haven't done this yet, but I'm guessing that is simply done. Their preference would be that you utilize the NXOS API, which we'll get into a little bit in this video, but mostly in another video, but simply do it locally, which is, I believe, the way that they're also doing the Chef integration. So they have a local, I don't even know what you call it, a Chef daemon, I guess. I don't really work with Chef that much, at least not yet, but that would be my guess. So more on that later, but that's obviously very, very interesting. So CDP, nothing new there, nothing new there. There's a few other things that are kind of cool. Let's go one down. So a few more options that we can look at, features. We're going to go into that here in a second. I did notice that IPv6 support is there. It actually, it depends on how much configuration we get into, but the way that it was configured for me when I first got into this, I noticed that there were a few things that existed in the IPv6 side that kind of impressed me, the fact that it was supported in that way. Sometimes, like, I'll give you a good example. I've always, one of the pet peeves of mine has always been having to enable a unicast routing for IPv6, seeing as it's enabled by default on a router or a layer 3 switch for IPv4. Obviously not a big deal to just go out of your way and say, I want to enable IPv6 unicast routing, but it still represents a sort of shift in mindset. Hey, IPv6 is kind of a big deal now. Kind of a big deal, but no, it's just kind of refreshing. I don't know. It's the little things that matter to me, I guess. It's just nice to see that it's enabled by default. Okay, so I looked through this list prior in prepping for this video, and I swore there were a few other things that I wanted to look at, but I will just scroll through this list, and if you want me to look into anything specifically in detail, please let me know in the comments, and I'll be happy to include it in a future video if there's enough to go over. OTV, that's pretty cool. And finally, we have this last section. There's XML here. I don't know if that's specifically related to the API. It's possible. I ran the command before. It doesn't really show you that much. Show XML server, I think. Yeah, I think that's it. Or rather, just status. Show XML server status. Show XML server internal. This I have not run. Oh, cool. Whew. This is a long command. How about that? Okay. I have made a few. So I have made a few API calls to this switch already. I don't know if that's what this is representing. I'm still going through the documentation, so you'll have to forgive me on that front. Anyway. Either way, it's probably best saved for another video. Let's move on to something that's also very cool. We'll go into configure mode for this one, and we'll do feature, just to look at all the supported features on this switch. Now, this is pretty interesting. So you enable the bash shell feature, and you know what? Let's just do that now, because I have not done that. Cool. So not a licensed feature. You just enable it, and you should have access to the bash shell. If I try to get into it, I will get distracted. So unfortunately, guys, I'm gonna have to leave it at that. Otherwise, this video will have to get a much longer title because of all the things we'll delve into. So we'll say I'm gonna show some restraint, which is so unlike me, but I'm gonna do it, and we're gonna keep trucking along with this. Feature ? DHCP, EIGRP, ISIS. Obviously, ISIS is a supported feature because that's, I believe, the basis on how ACI works. Not that it would really matter, but yeah, I mean, it makes sense. So I'm going to stop here because this is going to be the subject of, I believe, my very, very next video, if not one that's very soon. But NX API is that is the NXOS API present on the Nexus 9K. And this is an XML and or JSON API that you can program against. There is a nice little toolkit that if you were to enable this feature and access this switch's management interface via HTTPS, you can actually, it populates a nice little web page for you to run experimental API calls in a GUI fashion. So it'll tell you, here are the arguments that I need to run a basic API call. And things like that. It's pretty cool. I won't spoil that for you. Like I said, that's definitely a separate video because there's a lot to talk about there. That's not even really a networking video per se, although obviously it will be aimed at configuring a switch programmatically, which is really a new concept for most Cisco folks. A lot of other vendors have taken the leap long ago and implemented an API like this. Juniper comes to mind. They've been doing this for quite a while, I believe. So this won't be new to anybody with experience on that platform, but for those of us that have been relatively engrossed in Cisco for the short time personally that I've been in the industry, it's a breath of fresh air. So let's see, Ospf, nothing new. We're actually going to be enabling these because I want to just show that you can run Ospf, I guess. Password. Yep, definitely want that. SCP, yeah, nothing interesting there. Okay, so yeah, everything's mostly the same. In fact, the first thing that struck me is that there doesn't seem to be a ton of features. Then again, this isn't really meant to be positioned the same way as like a 7K or a 5K. And I guess when I look at this and I think there's not a lot of features, it's because I'm missing layer 2 centric features that I'm used to seeing on a 5K or 7K. Things like Fabric Path, for instance, or I actually mostly use 5Ks because I also do fiber channel deployments and FCOE, and of course VPC is missing, and that's just my experience and what I've implemented. So for this use case, obviously you want to see the major routing protocols, and we do. I mean, we see BGP, we see OSPF, we see ISIS, and OSPF v3, incidentally. So we can run an IPv6 fabric as well. Okay, so we've looked at the show version information. We've looked at the hardware. We've looked at just some show commands that we could play around with. We've looked at the features. Now it's time to actually configure the switch. So I have two switches here, as you can see up here. This is the one that we're playing with right now. There's another one over here that's been fully configured. In fact, they were both fully configured for me. While not really fully. It's an example, configuration. The two switches have 2 links live between them, which we'll see here in a second, and some test interfaces and networks to run OSPF over. So what we're going to do is we're going to reconfigure at a minimum to get some routes passing with OSPF and OSPF version 3, because if you are not configuring things in dual stack today, shame on you. So let's show VDC membership. Oh, yeah, you know what? I forgot. Like I said before, they add all of the interfaces by default, so there are no unallocated interfaces. Okay, so that was cool. Let's enable feature OSPF. Yeah. This is lab gear. I don't even know what the situation is with the license, but I assume that's going to get installed here soon. I believe this was I think this switch was just racked yesterday, frankly. Feature OSPF v3, I believe it is, yes. Okay, same thing. Let's see. Feature LACP for the port channel. Okay, cool. So next, the interfaces that are connected are ETH1 1 and 1.2. So we'll just do those guys. And we'll do a channel group. Mode active. And show port channel summary. Wait for those to come up. Oh, you know what? See, this is what I love about moving to this platform, because it's not a typical switch. So let's do this first. Show interface brief. Yeah. So I forgot to show you guys this. This is one of the coolest parts about it, frankly. All of the interfaces are by default shut, which is good. and they are all routed ports. So there are no switch ports in this environment. And you know what? I don't even know if I can even make any interface a switch port. I presume that you can. No, you cannot. That's interesting. Okay. So I might be doing something wrong there, but nevertheless, it's still what we want to do. So we'll just simply go back into both of the ports, and we'll say no shut. And if we show the port channel summary again, yeah, so both ports are up, cool. So this is now a layer 3 port channel, which is cool. Yeah, so we can see that it's up, U, and it is routed, R. And that means also that if we do a show IP interface brief, you know what? That is interesting. Oh, never mind. I haven't configured an IP address yet. Silly me. Let's do that. Uh, 172.116 is just an internal interface, part of a point-to-point. So there you go. And I'm not even going to bother typing this out. You guys don't need to see me type out a 128-bit address. Okay, so we also, while we're here, let's enable Ospf, and we'll do it for area 0. And same thing with oh, before I just simply type that in without an explanation, it's worth mentioning that in Ospf v3 the process tag is not a simple number like it is with IPv4 variety. You actually have to specify a word tag to describe the process. A little bit of a difference. And area 0 for that as well. Okay. Now, if we were to do a show IP Ospf neighbor, it would bark at us and say the process is not running, which is correct. So let's go ahead and do that. For IPv4. We'll leave it at that. We could configure a router ID or things like that, but this is not an Ospf lesson, is it? Ospf v3 testing. And it looks like we're in full state for that. Show IPv6 Ospf neighbor. Cool. Everything is up and running. Now let's do a show IP route. Cool. Looks like we have an intra-area route and two inter-area routes. I think those are 2 loopbacks on the other switch, if I'm not mistaken. All right, so that was super off the cuff for me. I frankly expect to just in my goings over the switch configuration and looking through some of the features, I'll probably have to come out with a part 2 of this, just because I think that there's going to be a lot of interest in this process. So please feel free to comment, either if you're on YouTube, feel free to leave a comment here. I recommend that you go to my blog. I'll probably have this video embedded in a blog article, and that you can comment there too. I get it all at keepingitclassless.net. You can also poke fun at me on Twitter. I enjoy getting made fun of from time to time. I am at Mierdin, Mierdin. So hope this was informative for you. Let me know if there's anything you'd like me to look at, whether it's initial configuration or maybe a specific feature that I'm going to get into in the future, and I will be happy to go through it. Thanks for watching.